highlighting a few key aspects of his career. So currently, I mean, he's basically a pediatric pulmonologist and an environmentalist. And he's also a visiting physician scientist at the Vecher Center for Climate Change in Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Um, he dons multiple hats, honestly, and he is, the member of the World Health Organization, the WHO, working specifically on the climate health working group. He is also an advisor there. He is a visiting faculty at multiple, universities, and not just in India, across the globe, US, Canada, Nepal, and so on and so forth. Um, there are a lot of, advisory roles that he has taken in the past. Yeah, it's quite expansive. And yeah, I can go on and on, but Professor Parmesh, I hand over, the baton to you, and yeah, let you take over, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for your kind introduction. I think, can we have the biodata of Professor Thomas Munzal? While wishing a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night all over the world, welcome you all for this beautiful meeting. And the theme of this one, environmental risk factor in cardiovascular diseases, and the transportation, noise, and cardiovascular health. This will be spoken by the Professor Dr. Thomas Munzal. He is the senior professor and environmental cardiologist, Johannes Gutenberg University, Mainz, Germany. And detailed biodata, can we project it, please? I think it has not come.
Yes, sir. It is there now.
Now, yes. Okay. Professor Munzal's expertise lies in the interventional cardiology and vascular biology. He completed his postdoctoral training in vascular biology at the Institute of Applied Physiology under Professor Eberhard Bassenger at Albert Ludwigs University, Freiburg. He furthered his research as a visiting scientist in the laboratory of David G. Harrison at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, focusing on endothelial function and oxidative stress. Dr. Munzal is a co-initiator of Gutenberg Health Study, one of the world's largest and most comprehensive prospective cohort studies. He was also the founding director of the Center for Thrombosis and Noise and Hemostasis in Mainz since 2011. His research has centered on the impact of environmental stresses such as noise and air pollution, pollution, and cardiovascular health. He has over 1,290 publications. Hats off to you, sir. His Google Scholar H index is 158. With all these things, we are very fortunate enough to hear from Professor Thomas Munzal regarding transport, noise, and cardiovascular health. I think over to you, sir.
So we share the screen. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me. So maybe can you mute your microphones so then we don't have the echoes? Actually, I'm very pleased about the invitation to give you a presentation concerning noise and cardiovascular health. I have no conflict of interest. And of course, if you're living close to the airport in Frankfurt, you have to deal with the importance of noise and the potential effects in causing cardiovascular disease. So just recently, he published a paper on environmental risk factors in cardiovascular disease. And here you summarize the reasons for CVD, like air pollution, light pollution, bad urban city planning, climate change, and traffic noise. And in my talk, I just want to focus on traffic noise. So what is the global burden of disease due to transportation noise? So the WHO states that transportation noise is the most underrated environmental risk factor.
Professor Manjul, sorry for the interruption, but we are not able to see your screen properly. It is very blurry. Also, your voice is getting cut in between.
Yeah.
Is your internet connection stable?
Should be okay. Usually, not a problem. Usually. I can maybe switch to my iPhone. It's maybe then I have to start all over again.
Still blurred. We cannot see. Yes, better.
Yes, it's better.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, let's start again. Oh. Yeah, thank you very much again for the invitation, and I'd like to tell you about the important transportation noise and its relationship to cardiovascular health. And I told you initially that living close to Frankfurt, we have to deal with pressure transportation.
Voice is not there. We cannot hear.
Cannot hear. You cannot hear?
No voice.
It's just very feeble, Professor.
Can't hear.
Actually, The microphone is on. And now, and now, and now, and now, and now, and now, and now,
Yes. Yes, yes, 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 yes.
My God.
Yes,
Oh
yes,
my God.
yes,
Oh
yes.
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 my God.
Yes,
Oh my God.
yes.
this was very strange. Do you hear me? See my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. It's very clear.
And you hear me?
Voice is not there.
It is there, but it is feeble.
We can't hear. I cannot hear any word.
But microphone activated. Hear me? Hear me?
Very feeble. Little more, please.
I have the maximum of
Very feeble.
the internet is not strong enough, maybe. So what can we do?
Madhusudan, can you do something? We cannot hear.
Maybe I think we should keep our volumes high only when
Oh,
Dr.
I kept very
Manjal
high.
is,
I kept very high.
or else Dr. Manjal try joining again. That might work as it worked earlier.
You see my slide?
Yes, it is very clear.
But my voice is not good.
It is feeble.
So it must be the internet connection.
I think this time it is about the microphone because your voice is feeble, but we are able to see your screen very clearly.
Maybe I should I would mute the microphone, I think, at once. It works this way, you know.
Yes, Professor, try moving the microphone closer. It might work.
Okay. Go start all over again. So thanks for inviting me for this seminar concerning noise and cardiovascular health conflict of risk. Just recently, we published a paper concerning environmental risk factors in cardiovascular disease. And on the right side, you see several environmental stressors which may cause cardiovascular disease, such as air pollution, light pollution, bad urban city planning, climate change, and traffic noise. So, what is the global burden of disease due to transportation noise? And so we know from the WHO that noise is the most underrated environmental risk factor, second most important risk factor for health problems. At least 1.6 million healthy years are lost every year from traffic-related noise in the western part of Europe. Today, nearly 150 million Europeans in towns and cities are exposed to noise levels more than 55 decibels, road, rail, and aircraft traffic. And importantly, if you keep the noise levels below 55 decibels, you will save 110,000 lives per year. That's a personal communication from Mette Sørensen from Denmark. Just calculated this, but this value is not published yet. European Environment Agency says we are getting 900,000 cases of arterial hypertension, 40,000 hospitals.
Needs slight change. Slides not getting changed.
I'm still with the first one. 0.5 million people suffer from sleep disturbance and 22 million from.
Yes, we are able to see only the first slide as of now.
Okay. Yeah. So you just see the first one?
Yes, the first one.
So nothing works today. That's why this was actually the reason why I was asking make a trial the day before, because I knew this kind of problem. But you don't see that I'm transporting the slides?
No, we just see the first slide.
I don't know. I'm not an IT expert. I don't know. Who has an advice?
Dr. Manzil, if it's getting difficult to, share it, one option is you could probably email the presentation to Madhusudan. He can take care of the slide change from his end and you can just maybe talk if that's easier and better.
You hear me?
Yes, yes.
So now it's much better, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
yes.
Yes.
So
It's better.
I think we try it one more time. If it's not working, we stop. Okay. So thanks again for inviting me to this webinar concerning the topic transportation noise and cardiovascular health. As I was introduced, I'm living close to Frankfurt. So if you're living close to Frankfurt, of course, you have to deal with aircraft noise. And this is something which I was very excited about, to study the mechanism underlying noise causing cardiovascular disease. I have no conflict of interest. Just recently, we published a paper in Cardiovascular Research concerning the environmental stressors, air pollution, light pollution, bad urban city planning, and climate change causing cardiovascular disease. And as I told you, my topic is traffic noise, and that's I want to focus in my talk. So what is the global burden of disease caused by transportation noise? So the WHO states it's the most underrated risk factor, second most important environmental reason for health problems. 1.6 million healthy life years are lost every year from traffic noise in the western part of Europe. And each day, nearly 150 Europeans in towns and cities are exposed to daily noise levels more than 55 decibels. And this is very important because above 55 decibels, adverse health effects are expected. And there's some recent calculation from Mette Sørensen. She's the world expert in road noise from Denmark. And she calculated that keeping the levels below 55 decibel will save 110,000 lives per year. So the European Environment Agency states we have 900,000 cases of hypertension, 40,000 hospital admissions, 6.5 million people suffer from sleep disturbance, which is very important because
Dr. Mansur, sorry for the interruption, but
Slides.
we are not able to see the slides. We are seeing your mailbox. Or else you can share your slides with me. I can present it.
I sent you my presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, I will.
Yes.
I haven't received it yet.
So I have to prepare it a bit. It's a big file. Did you get it?
No, still I haven't received it.
So maybe it's a large file. It takes a while.
Maybe.
Hopefully. You are Madhusudan?
Yes.
Okay.
I still haven't received anything, Professor Manjul.
Yeah. It's 103 megabytes, so that's maybe the reason why it takes longer.
Yeah.
So I try another email, Google. Maybe this works.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's really a shame. Very sorry for that, but I just sent it off with Google.
Yes, I got it.
It's the first time that you're having the problems.
Yes, yes.
So you share it now.
Yes.
Now the presentation mode.
Answer.
That will go here.
ಇಲ್ಲ enable content. Go to the slideshow. ಪಕ್ಕದ ಅದೇ ಪಕ್ಕದ.
Yes. Can you see the screen?
No,
No.
we had it and then we lost it.
Can you see it now?
No.
No.
Okay, I'll try sharing it again.
And now the presentation mode.
Yes.
Now
Yes.
you can see it? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
see it.
Yes, so if I do it full screen, you're not able to see it. So we'll just keep it this way.
Okay. This is very interesting. It's a seminar full surprises here. So, okay, let's try again. Just the next slide. So, of course, yeah, I'm invited to present a talk concerning noise pollution and cardiovascular disease. And in a recent manuscript we published in Cardiovascular Research, we focused on environmental stressors and CVD, and for example, air pollution, light pollution, bad urban city planning, and climate change. And as I told you, I want to focus completely on traffic noise caused by aircraft, railway, and road noise, and the impact on cardiovascular disease. Next slide, please. So here you see the German intercity train, which always coming too late. Maybe you had the experience already in Germany. The next slide. So what is the global burden of disease caused by transportation noise? So the WHO states it's the most underrated environmental risk factor, the most important environmental reason for health problems. 1.6 million healthy years are lost every year from traffic-related noise in the western part of Europe. And very importantly, every day more than 150 million Europeans in towns and cities are exposed to noise levels more than 55 decibels. And this is very important because the WHO defines more than 55 decibels per day is making you sick. And more recent calculations from Mette Sørensen, the world expert of road noise in Denmark, she calculated when we can manage it to keep the noise levels below 55 decibel, this will save 110,000 lives per year. So European Environment Agency states that we have per year 900,000 cases of hypertension, 40,000 hospital admissions, 6.5 million people suffer from high sleep disturbance, which is very important because too short sleep, frequently interrupted sleep, is known to be a cardiovascular risk factor per se, and 22 million people suffer from the annoyance reaction due to noise. The next slide. So how does noise cause cardiovascular disease? The next slide, please. So this is a model introduced by Wolfgang Babisch from the German Environment Agency, and he proposed, as you see in the middle, two mechanisms. So we have the so-called direct pathway, which means if you see on the left side, when you have noise levels more than 100 decibel, for example, caused by a jackhammer, this, of course, will damage the ear organ and will lead to hearing loss. More importantly is the so-called indirect pathway. This means decibel levels between 50 and 60. As you see on the left side, it is about the decibel level of a conversation. And this will cause, of course, if it takes place in the night, disturbance of sleep and communication. And this will make us angry. And if you are angry, we have stress. And on the right-hand side, you see the stress axis activated by noise. So we see a trigger of the HPA axis the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which results in a sympathetic nerve activation. We also have increased levels of cortisone, and this at the end will lead to an activation of the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So we get more inflammation, oxidative stress, and vascular dysfunction. So these stress responses, interestingly, when you have this chronically, will cause generate cardiovascular risk factors. So we get arterial hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol levels. And the first damage we can catch in response to stress is, for example, endothelial dysfunction. And if you have this for years, the situation, you will develop manifest cardiometabolic disease, including stroke, heart failure, ischemic heart disease, and arrhythmia. The next slide, please. So I told you that this annoyance reaction is very important. And what is the most annoying transportation noise source? It's always aircraft noise. So at the x-axis, you see the increasing decibel levels, and on the y-axis, the percentage of highly annoyed people. And as you can nicely see, for example, for 60 decibel, aircraft noise is much more annoying than road noise and railway noise. The next slide. And it's pretty interesting that we've seen with respect to transportation noise, different developments with respect to the development of the annoyance reaction. This is a paper published from the hyena trial. It's a multi-airport trial, like you can see on the right side, the different cities participating in Europe in this study. And as you can nicely see on the left-hand side, comparing road traffic noise and aircraft noise, so the development of the so-called annoyance reaction. Then we have 10 years ago, the so-called European Union curve, the relationship between decibel levels and the annoyance reaction. And you see that 10 years later, the so-called hyena curve, there is no change at all in the sensitivity to develop annoyance, while on the right-hand side, with respect to aircraft noise, there's a huge shift to the left. So overall, we are getting more sensitive to aircraft noise with our reaction of annoyance, but nobody knows for sure what it means. But it's very important, since more recent data also indicated when you are getting annoyed by transportation noise, that at the end you get a persistent activation of the limbic system, and this leads in turn to inflammation of the vasculature, and at the end to more cardiovascular events. So the annoyance reaction is very important. The next slide, please. So noise causes CVD. I just want to give you a brief example. Next slide, please. So this is a paper published also from the hyena trial, and it indicates the importance of nighttime noise and stress reactions here. For example, the increase in blood pressure. So when your house is getting passed by an aircraft in the night, your blood pressure will always increase systolic and diastolically by 6 and 7 millimeter mercury. So it's interesting to see that this increase in blood pressure in response to aircraft noise does not require an awakening reaction. So always when an aircraft is passing, you will get an increase in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. And this makes sense because you can close your eyes, but the ears are always ready for stress reactions. So when we have noise in the night, your body will increase with sympathetic nerve activation, at the end increase in blood pressure. The next slide. So in a recent paper published in Redox Biology, we analyzed in a meta-analysis of cohort studies on all-cause mortality in response to transportation noise, that we see an increase of overall mortality of 5.1% per 10 decibel. So that's always important. We always calculate the risk in response to an increase in 5 or 10 decibel. So this is a very high number. if you imagine that, for example, this already starts in the area of 35 decibels, so 35 to 45 is an increase of 5.1%, and from 45 to 55 again 5.1%. So this would mean an overall increase of 10% in response to 10 decibel increase. The next slide, please. And we also performed in this circulation research paper by calculating the relative risks obtained from a meta-analysis of an umbrella review for all cardiovascular diagnoses combined. The cardiovascular risk increased by 3.2% per 10 decibel higher road traffic noise. So again, per 10 decibel means if the relationship starts already in 35 decibel, if it's going up to 55 decibel, this means an overall increase of 6.4% to develop ischemic heart disease, arrhythmia, stroke, and heart failure. The next slide. It's also important to consider that, of course, we never have one noise source alone. So usually we have a combination of railway noise, aircraft noise, and road noise. And here you can nicely see from a paper from Thatcher and Mette Sørensen from Denmark, when we have increasing noise sources, for example, railway, road, and air traffic noise, that the risk to get ischemic heart disease, myocardial infarction, and heart failure is strongly increased. So this is very important to consider co-exposure also to other noise sources when we are calculating the cardiovascular risk. The next slide, please. One which is always concerning are the cerebral side effects of noise. And I just want to give you one example in the next slide. Again, by Mette Sørensen, published in the British Medical Journal, where they investigated 2 million adults and 103 patients. 3,000 patients were established with dementia. This means in this particular cohort, they had a 10-year mean exposure to road noise, and there was a higher risk for dementia, in particular the Alzheimer subtype, and the hazard ratio when you had noise higher than 65 decibel for 10 years, the likelihood to get dementia is increased by 30%, which is quite a lot. The next slide, please. Of course, with respect to cardiovascular disease, we were interested in the mechanism, how noise can cause, for example, vascular dysfunction. The next slide. And we started in 2010 getting an aircraft noise from the Düsseldorf airport, and we investigated the effect of nighttime aircraft noise exposure on endothelial function and stress hormone release in healthy adults. And just one explanation for the methodology we use. So we usually use the flow-dependent dilation methodology to check for vascular function or dysfunction. On the left-hand side, you see a vessel which is normally regulated, the tone of a vessel, by nitric oxide, which is released by the endothelium. And this nitric oxide has vasodilating but also anti-atherosclerotic properties. So when you have cardiovascular risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, or if you are a chronic smoker, then the vessel changes and you get an increased production of this O2 minus, so superoxide anions. So you have more oxygen-derived free radicals, which will attack nitric oxide, leading to highly toxic metabolites, for example, like peroxynitrite. And this in turn will initiate or accelerate atherosclerosis. So as you can see also on the left-hand side, when we do this endothelium measurements of the flow-dependent dilation reflecting endothelial function, that there are close correlations to endothelial function of the coronary arteries. So when we are doing this flow-dependent dilation methodology and we see that flow-dependent dilation deteriorates, we can conclude at the end this concerns also the coronary arteries. So the flow-dependent dilation means we are measuring the diameter of the baseline diameter of the brachial artery. And then we make an occlusion with a blood pressure cuff so that nothing is flowing through the artery. After 5 minutes, we open the cuff, you get reactive hyperemia, and this reactive hyperemia causes release of nitric oxide from the vasculature and is usually causing dilation of about 10%. So that's the normal endothelium-dependent dilation. The next slide. So what did we now in our translation studies in humans? So we simulated nighttime aircraft noise, which was actually exposing medical students with an MP3 player, this aircraft noise, and we had 30 or 60 noise events per night. So this was a field study, which means it was done in the house of the study participants and not under laboratory conditions. As I said, 30 or 60 flights, simulation per night, peak sound pressure level 60 decibel, mean sound pressure level 43 and 46 decibel. And on the right-hand side, we also equip these medical students with polygraphic screening devices, which mean blood pressure and heart rate. And we were measuring flow dependence, so endothelial function before and after noise exposure. The next slide, please. So the interesting point when we check the impact of aircraft noise, it's interesting to see that in healthy subjects, just one night of aircraft noise can cause an impairment of endothelial function. You see that it's going down from 12% to 10 or 9.5%. So it looks like a dose response curve. The higher the noise level, the more reduction of flow dependent dilation. And then we gave vitamin C, which means usually 2 grams per orally. 2 hours later, we measure again flow dependent dilation, and you see a strong increase in flow mediated dilation, which means that oxidative stress is likely responsible for this endothelial dysfunction. We did the same with railway noise. We have the same data, reduction of flow dependent dilation by one night of railway noise. By giving vitamin C, we see an improvement of flow dependent dilation. And the right-hand side, you see typical markers for oxidative stress like nitrotyrosine and isoprostane. And you can nicely see that one night of aircraft noise increases nitrotyrosine level and isoprostane levels in response to this nighttime aircraft noise. The next slide, please. Then we investigated the impact of aircraft noise on endothelial function in patients with established coronary artery disease. The next slide, please. And on the right-hand side, you see the worsening of flow-dependent dilation in healthy subjects, HS, and patients with coronary artery disease. And you see that the worsening of endothelial function is much more pronounced when you have already established cardiovascular disease. The next slide. So based on our study, which was published in European Heart Journal, we got a very nice editorial from John Dienfield. He's the Pope, let's say, of endothelial function measurements. And he was having the title Nighttime Aircraft Noise Exposure Flying Towards Arterial Disease. And he made a very nice cartoon saying aircraft noise makes stress hormone release. And this at the end impairs nitric oxide synthase function. So there may be an uncoupling of the nitric oxide synthase. And we also have more superoxide production, the production of reactive oxygen species. And maybe this enzyme NADH oxidase is involved. And as you may know, but if nitric oxide reacts with superoxide, we get this peroxynitrite. And this is very damaging for endothelial function, leading to more contraction and less vasodilation. So this editorial actually encouraged us to continue with the model developments. So we started with animal studies. The next slide, please. And we published 2 years later a paper in European Heart Journal with the impact of aircraft noise on vascular function, demonstrating more oxidative stress, inflammation. And the model was pretty similar what we did in our healthy students. We exposed them to aircraft noise. The levels were slightly higher with 85 decibel, the mean decibel levels 72. We exposed mice for 1, 2, and 4 days to noise. And importantly, for comparison, we used identical mean sound pressure levels of white noise. And just to tell you that white noise has no adverse effects on vascular function at all. And Nature Review Cardiology, actually, they acknowledged that we were the first group worldwide establishing an animal model for studying the cardiovascular side effects of transportation noise. Next slide, please. So here are the results of our translational animal experiments. So as you can see in the upper line, we get, no surprise, an increase in systolic blood pressure in response to noise. We see an increase in stress hormone level like plasma noradrenaline. Of course, we can measure endothelial function in the aorta of these animals by stimulating the vasculature with acetylcholine, which is let's say, an endothelium-dependent vasodilator, which releases nitric oxide. And you can nicely see that 1, 2, and 4 days of noise cause a shift to the right with the dose-response relationship, which means we get endothelial dysfunction, like we did establish in our medical students. And you see on the right-hand side that NO production goes significantly down. Now, in the lower level, you see the impact of noise on oxidative stress. You see the brownish color after 1, 2, and 4 days, which means we have this nitrotyrosine protein changes. And this is really incredible that we've seen just after 1 night already very strong evidence for oxidative stress in the vasculature. And when we have oxidative stress, we always see in parallel an increase in expression of endothelin-1, which is a very important vasoconstrictor. So this means oxidative stress leading to endothelin expression, which nicely explains also the increase in blood pressure in response to aircraft noise. The next slide, please. We could also, and got also a very nice editorial from Tom Guzik and Keith Chen linking noise to cardiovascular disease. And here's a nice wrap up on the right-hand side, a cartoon which summarizes the results from these studies. And important point is that we also see very strong changes in the brain. So we see more oxidative stress in the brain, and we see also an upregulation of NOx2, which is a very important NADPH oxidase isoform, which is responsible for superoxide production here in the brain, but also in the vasculature. And this NOx2 activation, which is actually an superoxide producing enzyme, which is located in inflammatory cells like macrophages. This leads also to a dysfunctional uncoupled nitric oxide synthase, which means an enzyme which usually produces nitric oxide is getting switched to an enzyme which producing superoxide, with the consequence of endothelial dysfunction, more vascular inflammation, and more vasoconstriction. The next slide, please. So the important point is that I told you that when we expose healthy medical students, we get within 1 night significant vascular dysfunction. And we've seen the same in animals. So when we expose animals to nighttime noise, 1 night is already sufficient to get endothelial dysfunction. And there are also some other studies, also from the hyena trial here, which support that in particular nighttime aircraft noise is very damaging or more leading to cardiovascular consequences. On the 2 graphs on the left-hand side, you see the impact of aircraft noise during the day and the night, and just aircraft noise in the night was sufficient to increase the blood pressure. The next slide. Next slide, please. And here you can see that one back, nighttime noise is in particular damaging, one back. You see that when we expose mice in the sleep phase to noise, we get nice endothelial dysfunction. That's the shift to the right for the acetylcholine dose response curve. When we apply noise during the awake phase, nothing is happening. So the vascular function is completely normal. On the right-hand side, you see endothelial expression, which is substantially stronger when we expose animals to nighttime noise as compared to daytime noise. And you also see on the bottom that the blood pressure effects, the effects on systolic and diastolic blood pressure, are clearly enhanced when we expose animals during the night to aircraft noise as compared to exposure during the day. The next slide, please. I told you that we see in the brain and in the vasculature an upregulation of NOx2, which is an important superoxide producing enzyme in inflammatory cells. The next slide. So the big question was when we make a knockout of macrophages, so NOx2 knockout, what is it doing to vascular function and to oxidative stress and inflammation? And this was published by Svenja Kröller-Schön, also in European Heart Journal. There you can nicely see on the left-hand side at the bottom that actually knocking out NOx2 completely normalizes endothelial dysfunction caused by transportation noise, by aircraft noise. It completely reduces oxidative stress in plasma, and the knockout also completely normalizes inflammation in the vasculature. So our concept based on these demonstrations or findings is that in particular nighttime noise, which means that we have a very short sleeping period or frequent interruption of sleep, and this causes immense stress responses, which at the end causes cardiovascular damage due to noise. So let me summarize. The next slide, please. Our animal experiments, next slide. So you see everything in the cartoon on the right-hand side. So the color is in black, indicating that in particular nighttime noise is very damaging. It causes subtle changes in the brain. So we see more oxidative stress, NOx2 activation. We also see an uncoupling of the neuronal NOS. So the neuronal NOS is very important, the NOS for cognitive function. So when we see a downregulation of the enzyme, this would, for example, explain why children being exposed to noise have a retardment of the development of cognitive function. We see, of course, sleep disorders, and we see a stress hormone activation. Cortisol goes up, Ang2, dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. And this, of course, will lead to vascular dysfunction. Interesting point is also we see changes in the expression of genes regulating the central clock. So we see evidence for central clock dysregulation, but also for vascular clock dysregulation. So we see more oxidative stress in the vasculature, less nitric oxide, and this, of course, will lead to more cardiovascular risk factor and at the end to more cardiometabolic disease. The next slide, please. So we were also interested if you have patients with myocardial ischemia, for example, acute myocardial infarction, what is the impact of noise? And we studied this in animal experiments first, where we exposed animals with an acute myocardial infarction to aircraft noise. The next slide, please. And here you see the protocol in A. So you see our mice, we exposed them for 4 days to aircraft noise. Then we made a myocardial infarction by ligating the coronary artery. And then we were checking for muscular function, so left ventricular function. Interesting point was when we had noise exposure before the myocardial infarction, so that's the bottom line, you can nicely see you get a larger ventricle and more impairment of left ventricular function. You see this also on the right-hand side in the upper lane. Ejection fraction goes down significantly stronger when you had a myocardial infarction after noise exposure compared to those animals having no preconditioning of aircraft noise. And at the bottom, you see that endothelial dysfunction, of course, is getting worse when you have a myocardial infarction, but you have when you have preconditioning with noise, endothelial function is getting much worse. So there is no doubt that in the acute situation of myocardial infarction, if you are living in an area where we have very high noise level, subsequently you will have a negative impact on left ventricular function. And you can see this also on the left-hand side. These were also data included in this translational papers where we checked in the Gutenberg Health Study for the impact of noise on left ventricular function in people being annoyed to noise. And you can nicely see that those being annoyed to noise had at the end a worse ejection fraction compared to people not being annoyed by noise. So this is in the area of Frankfurt Airport where we have not many noise sources. And you can conclude indirectly that here also noise preconditioning, mainly because of aircraft noise, will lead to a worse left ventricular function. And on the right-hand side, you see the impact of noise in subjects with acute myocardial infarction. It's a paper published by Ulbrich from the Frankfurt area. And what they nicely show that over 5 years, if you have an increase in decibel levels here from, I can read it actually exactly, but we have a dose-dependent increase in recurrent myocardial infarction when we have so it's 35, 40, 50, and 60 decibel. You see a dose-dependent increase in reinfarction and mortality rates when we are exposed after an acute myocardial infarction in the following 5 years to aircraft noise. Next slide. We were also interested in cardiometabolic disease caused by noise, for example, diabetes, and we just had this publication where we showed in 3 different models of diabetes, mellitus type 1, type 2, and diabetes type 2 combined with metabolic syndrome, 3 different animal models, that actually aircraft noise, in addition to diabetes, has a very strong impact on arterial blood pressure and on vascular function. So which means when you have diabetes and you are exposed to aircraft noise, that the cardiovascular consequences are getting substantially worse. Next slide, please. So what we need is to mitigate the noise consequences. And here also we have some very exciting animal experiments checking the impact of the activation of the enzyme AMP kinase. So the AMP kinase is an enzyme which is located in the endothelium, but also in the smooth muscle. And this enzyme is getting activated when the vessel is getting energy depleted. And we have 3 regimens which activate the AMP kinase: exercise, fasting, and the so-called ICAR treatment. It's a direct activator of the enzyme. For example, it's completely comparable to metformin, a very important anti-diabetic medication. And as you can see in the middle here, the blood pressure responses, noise increases blood pressure in all 3 groups, and then fasting, training, and ICAR treatment completely normalizes the blood pressure. On the right-hand side, you see endothelial dysfunction caused by noise, and again, training, fasting, and ICAR treatment completely normalizes vascular function. So what we have to do in future to establish human protocols where we test the impact of fasting, training, and metformin treatment on vascular function. So that's actually a way to fight the cardiovascular consequences of noise by activating this AMP kinase. Next slide, please. Of course, it's better to reduce the noise, and we have to turn down the volume below 55 decibel. Where I told you that we can save 110,000 lives per year. So we have beautiful possibilities to reduce road noise, railway noise, and aircraft noise. But the problem is nothing is getting sufficiently implemented because it's very costly. On the right-hand side, you see a summary from the European Union how to reduce noise levels. And on the right side, you see the so-called cost effectiveness 1 means very bad cost effectiveness, 5 very good one. And so the interesting point is, for example, that electric cars can reduce the noise just by 1 decibel, which means that the driving style and the road service or the tires are mainly contributing to the noise caused by a car. Next slide, please. Of course, we have to follow the WHO recommendations with respect to road, aircraft, and railway noise. The recommendations make sense. The problem is WHO recommendations are no laws, so nobody from the politicians feels responsible to implement these very meaningful noise limits, and that's what we are fighting for, is that noise is getting acknowledged as a cardiovascular risk factors, and we need in Europe European Union directive, which means that the WHO recommendations are getting European law, so that we can reinforce the noise limits by judges. The next slide, please. So how about the importance of green space? The next slide, please. And this is a beautiful study which was done in Denmark also, and the hazard ratio of diabetes mellitus type 2 in response to ultrafine particle exposure, to NO2 exposure, and to road noise exposure, but also looking for the impact of green space. And if you look at the right side at the bottom for these forest plots, you can easily see that ultrafine particles and road traffic noise, and also the lack of green space, that's very important, has a strong impact on the incidence of diabetes mellitus. And if you combine all risk factors, we call this, of course, co-exposure, you see this cumulative risk index is really rather strong. This is for the occurrence of diabetes, and it's also shown for the occurrence of ischemic heart disease. So that's what we have to focus in the future, not just studying aircraft noise or climate change or temperature in the city or urban city design. We always have to look for the co-exposure aspect, because we have new data clearly demonstrating if you have, for example, railway noise, and in addition, an increase in air pollution, that the cardiovascular risk is increased in an additive way. Next slide. So we have good news concerning research, and this is a consortium with what just decided to get pushed by the European Union with almost 10 million euro per year, the Marco Polo consortium. This is also an abbreviation for markers of pollution, and you see here all the participating countries. So that's a big success for us. So we are applying for grants for many years, always unsuccessful. Nobody believes that the environment is important, but now that's a real big breakthrough for us, getting this funding for a very important research question. The next slide. Let me just make one comment to phase out of fossil fuel. Paper we published last year in British Medical Journal, where Joost Lelyveld from the Max Planck Institute, he calculated an excess mortality of 8.3 million people a year worldwide. And you see, of course, India and China are is the excess mortality by far the highest. But he also calculated, when we get rid of fossil fuel, so oil, gas, and coal, that we can save per year 5.1 million lives, which is an incredible number. And I hope that we reach this situation as soon as possible. Next slide, please. I'm not chief in cardiology anymore, so I'm a senior professor, and I'm very proud on having this powerful research team. And of course, with this new European Union grant, you can read from our group in the future a lot in the environmental literature. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm very sorry again for the problems we had in the beginning, but hopefully you stood until to the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
Professor Thomas Munzel, let me congratulate you. Wonderful. It makes us very proud of that to hear about cardiovascular diseases. As a matter of fact, Indian cities, they're rank high in the noise pollution. Noise pollution, and also we have effect high frequency deafness in newborns and pregnant mother exposed, leading to prematurity, intrauterine growth failure, sleep disturbance, annoyance, headache, decreased work deficiency, and poor school performance. All these things are related to that. In 2003, through the World Bank, we have recommended government of Karnataka to reduce the level. Airplane comes from the developed countries predominantly. I think we have to influence them, where other countries are bearing all those noise pollution related to this problem. And also, I think in addition to that, noise pollution on animals, we also take into consideration where there is marine animals, dolphins, whales, particularly impacted by noise pollution since they rely on echolocation, and altered behavior pattern will be that also we have taken into consideration, which also impedes some of the animals in the location of their food, attract the mates, avoid predators, their ability to survive. And also, and the bluebirds have fewer children with noise pollution, traffic and all the things. Having said that, you covered very well. I think aircraft noise is the number one cause causing noise pollution. People living near the airports have a higher increased blood pressure, and cardiac risk increased by 3.2% if there are 10 decibel increase. That you covered very well. And also it's pretty neurological, dementia, Alzheimer's, metabolic disease, diabetes too, all these things related to that. And mouse model has been proved, all those things you mentioned about it. And also you recommend to keep the decibels 55 decibels at night time. That's what we also recommend, 55 decibel. Anything maximum, anything more than 75 decibel is most dangerous. Most dangerous. And also convincing the politician you mentioned about it is very difficult. They always wanted economic related issues. What is the benefit related to that? That's what we have to look into that angle also, convincing the politician and the legal advisors. And
may I just say one sentence? Usually, the last slide of my presentation is, I didn't include it here. Also, the Indians and the Chinese people want to fly, and this is the perspective, because we see, of course, in Europe, you also have cheap aircraft companies which buy hundreds of Airbuses and Boeings, and just thinking about that, because you have more people which have now, from the economic point of view, the financial power to fly around in the world. And this is something, so you will have incredible growth rate in flights, and
I agree with you.
So this is some concern.
Economic growth going to cause all these problems. We are going to face much higher in later on. And also you presented very well the phasing out the fossil fuel. We definitely need fossil fuel. And the air pollution, noise pollution are definitely interrelated. And thank you very much, covering it very well. It made us very happy. And you have given enough food for the future researchers and how to mitigate and all this thing in various levels to mitigate. And also, if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to. Any questions, Madhusudan?
I request the participants, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box.
So the point is that noise pollution is not that well studied also, air pollution, we have much better numbers also, many studies, and we have very good pathophysiology. But I must admit, I'm on the one hand side, I like it very much that our group is the only one dealing with the impact of noise in animals and in healthy subjects. So having these translational models, nobody else in the world is doing that. So which is, of course, good for us. We can publish it wherever we want, I have the feeling that in the last 2 years, the people are taking you more serious, I'm running around 15 years now and saying, oh, noise is dangerous, air pollution is dangerous. Nobody was listening. But this is changing now, you know, the people are more interested in the environment. We get more grants. So it's the first time that the European Union is spending 6 grants and pushing environment research. That's the very first time. So it took them a long time, but it's going on now, you know.
I agree with you. I think light pollution is also, you mentioned about it. We have to
Very
take it into
important.
consideration.
Yeah.
Light pollution is, I think last year we published this paper. Yes.
And the important point is overall, in my feeling, is a healthy city design is very important because, you know, 2050, let's say 10 billion people are living in cities. Let's say we have 10 billion people and 80% are living in cities. So if you want to do something good for the population, you have to have a healthy city design, which means
Yes.
maybe also for India, you have to have 30% of green space in the city. And we have these heat island problems, you know, that the cities are too hot. And I don't know how it is in India. So in Germany, we get rid of green spaces and putting concrete in. And so the green space area is getting less and less. And we have very high temperature differences within a city, which means more heart failure, myocardial infarction, and stroke. So the city design is very important.
Thomas, I do agree with you. The center of the city, downtowns have become a heat city. Cement jungle emit heat at night time much higher. And also this month we have published a paper, how to maintain the green spaces. Very important. Economically, it is very, very helpful. If you spend $1, you can earn $34 worth of health benefit. 34 times more, not percentage, 34 times more. And also most of the greeneries, park and sport arenas, and we want to maintain it. Correct, we have to maintain it. Yes.
You know, and also, the other point is, continue.
Well, other point is what happened. Bangalore has grown so rapidly. From 1973, we had the 69.5% of the greenery. Now, 1922, it's only 2.9% greeneries.
Okay. Yeah.
This is so rapidly is growing. And also we had gomalas. That means green spaces for the feeding of the grazing of the cattle. So for 100 cattle, we had 30 acres. That was the breathing space for us. All of them had taken over. Yeah. We are working on that one to maintain the greeneries. Yes.
So I think we have 2 time bombs. Let me call that. The first is ultrafine particulate matter, because this enters the brain directly and it causes hypertension, and this is extremely dangerous, and we don't have enough data concerning ultrafine particulate matter. The second point is plastic, micro and nanoplastic. You know, this is we just had in Nature a review article where we discussed the impact. And there was one paper in New England Journal demonstrating if you have plastic in your carotid artery, the likelihood to get a myocardial infarction or stroke is strikingly increased. So this is just the beginning of a research area. And if we consider, I think it's also a problem in India that the beaches are polluted by plastic like hell. You know, it's all over the world. This is something where my fear is it's an epidemic which is we are getting confronted pretty soon. And we don't know yet what it means if you have more plastic in your vasculature, because plastic is all over the place. It's on the Mount Everest and also on the top of Mount Everest, in the deepest place on Earth, in the ocean. You know, it's all over the place. Nanoplastic, how to fight it? Is it important or not? So I have no idea yet.
Yes, nanoplastic in the ocean debris, if you do it, 24% belongs to that plastics. And small microparticle enters the bloodstream and also placenta, impacts on the growing baby and all this thing. It has been found out. In the brain also has been found out. Thank you.
So the problem is in my hand that the people are making these climate conferences in countries like Dubai and in Azerbaijan, where they love the oil, the gas, and the coal. You know, it's very funny that these kind of conferences are made in countries which make an introduction saying oil, gas, and coal is a gift of God, and then you have to discuss how to make a phase out of fossil fuels. Like you said, the economic interests are actually too strong. How can I tell Saudi Arabia to make a phase out of fossil fuels? So this means a knockout of the country to some extent. So we are in a situation which is very difficult to handle.
Yes. But I have to keep educating. One day it will come there. New technology should come there to overcome.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. If there are no question, I think time is over.
Yes, we have questions. We have a few questions in the chat box.
Yes.
So the first question is from Professor J. Srinivasan. Why is the impact of noise pollution more at night?
Yeah, so the reason, what we believe currently now is that it's an interruption of sleep. So sleep is very important to have a good circadian rhythm. And circadian rhythm is regulating to a very strong degree also vascular function. So we realized when we expose our medical students or patients to nighttime aircraft noise that you get within one night substantial endothelial dysfunction. And we have also seen, interestingly, the same course in animals. So you're always saying, what has the mouse to do with the man, and we can say the time course of endothelial dysfunction is exactly the same in mice and in healthy subjects. So just one night of noise is causing this phenomenon. And the interesting point is when we expose mice during the day, there is no change at all. So in cardiovascular function. So we believe that too short sleep, which means less than 6 hours of frequently interrupted sleep, is the reason for the vascular damage. And actually, we have also seen that, for example, stress hormone release, like adrenaline, noradrenaline, is strikingly higher when you expose animals during the night to aircraft noise and not during the day. And this is something which is very important because during the day you have many other some situations which bother you maybe, and in the night it's just the noise which is keeping you awake, and this stress is the most negative one we can experience actually. Boys?
So I'm sorry about that. We have another question from Jose Matthew. Why is aircraft noise more harmful or disturbing than the road noise or rail noise?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, and I must admit I had the experience in all three noise sources. So I was living close to the Autobahn, so I had the road noise. I was living close to the railway, so I have the intercity noise. And now I'm living in Mainz, close to Frankfurt Airport. I have experience with aircraft noise, and I must admit the most annoying by far is aircraft noise. So what is the problem? I think it's has to do something with the frequency of the noise. So we couldn't study it correctly, but in all the studies, epidemiological or laboratory studies, the subjects being exposed to noise are always most annoyed by far by aircraft noise. I think it has to do something with the frequency of noise, and this makes you more angry, and then you have more cardiovascular disease. It's a very simple equation, but of course you have to demonstrate that the annoyance reaction has some impact on cardiovascular consequences.
So we have
But
one last
one last
question. How was noise measured in your study by Abdul?
In our study, you mean when we expose the healthy subjects? Yeah, so that's the only so we have actually an engineer. He's taking care for these exposure studies. So that's very important. So when we ask why we are the only group making these noise experiments, it cannot be done by a cardiologist. So you have to have the expertise of an engineer, and he makes the experiments with this MP3 player that they expose the people to noise. And of course, it has to be organized that the decibel levels at the ear has, let's say, 60 decibel like we did in the first study. So that's the major hurdle you have if you want to do noise research. It's not that difficult, but I told you we had this first paper in 2013 European Heart Journal, and I'm still surprised that no group in the world, no research group is doing this noise studies in humans or animals. So I hope that other groups are joining, because it's always, a little bit tricky if just one group publishes everything to the topic. It's important that you have a broad base, that several groups are working in different reactions and telling the people how damaging transportation noise is. That's what we need, actually. And maybe in your country, we can activate some researchers to do noise research. That would be very important.
Okay, shall we close? I think I take this opportunity thanking Dr. Thomas Munzel for a wonderful talk, what you have given, and opened everybody's eyes, look into this aspect and propagate this knowledge further. And also I'll thank all the participants, being the initial technical hitches, you stayed half an hour extra. Thank you very much for all of you for the same thing. I sincerely thank Dr. Shruti Subarna, Mr. Adhir Rao, and Madhusudan for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. And thanks a lot, and let's continue further and propagate the knowledge in future. Thanks a lot. So,
very good.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your patience. It was hard work to start. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.